Welcome to week 5 of Multimedia 122. Let's get started. For this week, we will be covering quite a few things related to the logo that you started with the thumbnails last week. We'll be talking about some logo considerations. I'll go a little bit deeper into logo design. Then we'll discuss how you're going to create your logo in Illustrator and what types of variations that I'm looking for, and then you'll generate a JPEG with those variations and you'll record a short screencast and post that to the discussion board. So as far as logos are concerned, there's a wide variety of different ways to approach logos. The primary purpose of developing a logo is so that you have some kind of symbol to communicate your identity. With this, your logo that you're going to create, since it is new, is not going to have necessarily the reach that these types of logos would. If you look at these single letters, you can probably recognize the majority of where these letters came from and what logo they're specifically related to. Now, that's not just because of the power of the way that it was drawn. It has to do with years of having that message being pumped at you over and over and over again through different ways of marketing. Now, looking at some of these other ones, you'll notice some similarities, and we'll also talk about some of the differences, but some of the similarities on these is the main thing with a logo is it needs to be visible and readable at small size as well as large size, which is why you'll oftentimes see a font that's being used that's a sans serif font. Most of the sans serif fonts are the ones without having the extra little squiggles at the end that are the serif. Sans is just French for without serif. The other thing is you'll notice that they are usually much more simple as far as their iconography is concerned. There's nothing that's super detailed within these. Looking at some of these are some of my students' logos and some other logos from other students, just to show a variety of ways of approaching stuff. So these would not be ones you would necessarily recognize, but just showing you kind of the variety of logos that my students have created in the past. Now, one of the things that I like, and this is absolutely not a requirement for the logos that you're creating for these fictitious businesses, but I really like when there's some kind of deeper meaning behind the logo itself. Sometimes the most simple logos happen to be the most clever. Looking at things like this, the idea of an open book creating the Empire State Building. New York is often referred to as Gotham, so having the main icon of the New York skyline being composed of books and it being Gotham Books is really clever. Same kind of thing with Fort Worth Zoo. With the Fort Worth Zoo, one of the things that you'll notice is they've got a lowercase f and a W to tie in with Fort and Worth, while those simplistic lines are actually creating the form of an elephant as well. Got Modern Nerd. Reader's Digest puts out different magazines and a variety of things. They've got family and marriage. Just the simplistic twisting or reversing of the letter creates the connection that they're implying through marriage. Interesting use of emojis. I love negative space logos where you have to look at it twice to see what's going on. So on this, you've got the kind of almost like the Tiger Woods golf game things where there's the little markers for the swing, but then also this is tied into Spartan. So if you've seen the movie 300, you've got the Spartan helmet and face. There's oftentimes hidden logos, even inside of logos that you already know about, like Tostitos. I don't know if you've seen this before, but in the Tostitos logo, there are two people holding a ginormous chip over a bowl of dip. Same kind of thing with Amazon. When Amazon first started, they were selling books. Now they pretty much sell everything from A to Z, as well as delivering from point A to Z. So they've got a little bit of a double meaning within their logo. Sun Microsystems, this one's a little bit more abstract, but they've got an abstracted S, U, and N, and no matter which way it's twisted, it'll spell out the S, U, and N. Now you have to do a little bit of Gestalt theory to fill in the gaps a little bit here on some of these. The Tour de France is a bicycling tour. It's a competition. So we've got a bicycler here hunched over a wheel with his head, back leg. The Big Ten, for quite some time in college football, the Big Ten was composed of the large 10 schools. However, at one point, they add an 11th team. So instead of getting rid of the name Big Ten, they just notched in the 1 so that this negative space becomes the 11. But then they couldn't stop at 11. They kept generating more. And this is one of the more recent ones that indicates the Big 16 that they still call the Big 10. And it's just a matter of cutting out portions of it. With Toblerone, don't know if you've seen before the hidden bear that's tucked inside of there. Now, with some of these, it's definitely purposeful. Sometimes, done on purpose, but sometimes they're kind of accidental. Baskin-Robbins has 31 flavors. 31. And then some deeper cuts. These are ones that you probably would not have seen before necessarily, or at least would be recognized as something that you would instantly know. Sony Vaio was a laptop computer that was out, and Sony, when they first started, were doing things in analog, basically tapes, and then they moved into computer technology. So this is actually the analog signal of what it would actually look like, and then 1s and 0s are digital. So the Vaio is showing the merge between their origins in analog as well as their emergence into the digital world. Same kind of thing with LG. LG's designer was a big fan of Pac-Man. You got the L, you've got the G, but if you look at the way that it's set up, it's merely just a cut of Pac-Man and shifted slightly. And then BMW, when they first started, they actually were a aviation company, and they manufactured airplanes. And this is representing the airplane propeller as if it's in movement, so you get that flickering that shows up. And then this one, I still don't know whether or not this is accurate or not. I think the actual designer may have been on drugs. I'm not positive about that, but they say that in this logo, the entire word Toyota can be spelled out in the T-O and so on. So those are all of the symbols to create the word Toyota, but the actual designer said this about that logo. He said that it wasn't Toyota, but it represented the heart of the customer, the heart of the product, and the heart of progress in the field of technology. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. All right, so let's take a look at some of the other negative space logos. Now, like I mentioned before, you're not required to do a negative space thing. I just find that a lot of students really gravitate towards these, and it's really an interesting thing to see. Once you've seen the negative space, you can't help but look at both items that are on the logo. So here's an example of one for Hope for African Children initiative. So when you're looking at the negative space, you're looking at this empty area here, or you reverse it and look at the colors and see the faces. Mo Sleep, I love this one. Don't know why it's so catchy, but the idea of not including anything here, it implies this connection between that corner and here to make a three-dimensional bed, yet all it is a series of rectangles and squares. Really, really smart. Same kind of thing here, Snooty Peacock. Bodywise Spa. This is perhaps one of my favorites. This is the Pittsburgh Zoo. It's just brilliantly rendered. Did a great job in being able to show off the tree, the water, but then also the gorilla's face facing right off with the lion. Piano Forest. The Hartford Whalers. The H, the tail, and the W. Love this one too. Yoga Australia, and that negative space right there between the intersection of the legs, the butt, and the arm creates the silhouette of Australia. Then perhaps the one that you may have seen before with Federal Express. They've done an adjustment to the kerning. Kerning is the amount of space between letters, so they've pulled them together closer, but in the process of doing that, the designer actually created this empty space to generate this arrow that's there, indicating that they're moving things from one location to another. Really, really smart. So Picasso was, and actually several other people have been credited with this particular statement, but the idea of good artists copy and great artists steal, the concept is that you incorporate the ideas of what you've been inspired by so much that other people think you came up with it, or that your way of doing it is the correct way. Now, my sister teaches English in Taiwan, and she sent me some odd pictures over time, in addition to these and some others, of some stuff where they have done some definite play on some American companies. Not sure what's on that pizza. Don't really know what KLG is. I do like Damas, but also I like my Adidoses. So really what we want to do is we want to shy away from stealing. I want to talk a little bit about Barbara Kruger. Barbara Kruger is a conceptual artist and collagist that worked in the 70s and 80s prominently. And her style really focused on trying to draw attention to the imbalance of power, identity, and sexual power in the 70s and 80s. She did a lot of things of making large installations and statements with this kind of format of a Xeroxed kind of photo with a black box with either Futura or a Helvetica condensed font, making very strong statements. She even did a very large installation that I saw a couple years ago in Washington, D.C., around the Smithsonian, where it was one giant room with an escalator filled with tons of statements. Really, really powerful, really, really interesting way to create artwork with just utilizing text. The thing is in the mid 90s to mid 2000s, there were some issues with this because a company, Supreme, blatantly has ripped off her actual aesthetic and use of that strong statement with the red box. Pretty lame. The idea is don't copy other people, but you'll see it's done all the time. Just look at the Lakers and the Clippers. Their logo are pretty much exactly the same. Look at NBC and the Nebraska television and so on. There's a lot of things that are out there that have just been blatantly copied. I want you to be able to get inspired by looking at other logos and things that are out there, and you can definitely modify what you have already created so you don't have to slavishly follow the logo that you drew out. You can modify it and make adjustments as we go along, but I just wanted to make sure that even though I'm going to show you some trends, I want you to really end up creating your own thing. So here are some basic things to consider when you are refining and further developing your final logo for this company. First thing is, fonts really do matter. And we're going to get deeper into typography as the semester goes along, but font choices do need to match the actual mood that you're trying to create. Fonts do have personality. The thing is, I do not want you to use the Myriad Pro font that is the default font in Illustrator. Pick something else. There's a ton of different fonts, and you have access to Adobe Fonts, which is an online free set of fonts, in addition to being able to access DaFont or Font Squirrel or other font websites. When you look at these, the fonts themselves should match with the feeling. So when you look at the Western font, it's got those tapered edges. You've got the military font, it's got the stenciled thing. These all of these fonts tie in with an emotion that seems to match with the word that's there. But watch what happens when we switch the fonts to purposely clash with the meaning of the word. These do not match. That does not look like a modern font. Using Comic Sans for a corporate name does not match. Sophisticated and that MT Curls font does not look sophisticated. So each of the fonts will have their own set of feelings, so make sure you choose correctly when doing so. The main thing to consider is put yourself in the shoes of who is your actual client. So depending on the company you chose, you need to understand who they are, because designing for the woman on the left might be different than designing for the person on the right. The other thing you have to do is you have to empathize with the client, but then you also have to understand who are they trying to reach. Because how you design, if this is their audience, is going to be significantly different than if this is their audience. So you not only need to be empathetic towards who the customer is, but you need to know who their customers are. It's a really important aspect as a designer to understand how people are going to interact with your designs. Now, here's some basic tips. First thing is, don't overly complicate your logo. In doing logo design, you may design a logo that may be as small as a favicon up in the top of your browser, all the way to being something that's on the side of a building or a billboard. So you need to have something that's readable at all sizes. With this particular one, the larger thumbprint looks really interesting on the larger size, but as soon as it's shrunk down, it just looks like a blob. You also want to avoid trendy choices. Even though I'm going to show you where the 2019 trendy things are, it's to get you so that you can actually see what is out there. But if you're going to create something that's going to last for a long time, you want to do some things that are a little bit more evergreen, meaning that they're going to last beyond the trends. The other thing is we don't want to use raster or bitmap images. Those would be photos, things that have pixels. We do not want that in the logo. We need to make sure that you have it in a vector format. So the logos that you're creating should only contain actual Illustrator files, Illustrator created vector objects. That way when they scale larger, you will not lose quality. The other thing is you want to check to see, will this work in black and white? Oftentimes things are photocopied or printed out, not in full color, and you shouldn't have it totally rely on the actual color that's being used. In addition to that, there are a certain percentage of people that are colorblind, so you want to make sure that you're adapting what it is that you've designed for the needs of all users. And then really be careful with the font. Even ironically, using the Comic Sans font is very, very off-putting for a lot of people. And then last thing on fonts is try not to use too many. If you put too many fonts into your logo or any of your designs, it's going to start looking like a ransom note, and it's really off-putting. So these will be the steps that you do next to develop your logo. The first thing is you'll open up Illustrator and you're going to create a vector version of your logo. So you're either going to trace what you've drawn or you're going to create it from scratch, and then you're going to develop a lot of variations. Within these variations, if you want to see a really good graphic designer that I like, Aaron Draplin, this is him taking on
we'll start by me getting the lens cap off that thing from all the professionals here in the shop.
I'll show you just the first couple minutes.
And welcome to the Draplin Design Company, and here we are. Let's get going. So here at the Draplin Design Company, it's basically just me doing whatever it takes to make cool stuff. And along the way, a full line of spirited merch, plastic things with DDC all over it, and of course, field notes. It's just a little book. There's some staples and some paper, and nice little edges. But what's most appropriate for these guys? What if we start, making some slabs here? Could be our little separators here. What do you even call that thing? Just sort of, here it is. As a way to test this stuff, I have all...
So with this, he'll go through and make a ton of variations of the logo, which is what you're going to be doing. I'll show you the logo variations that I made based on this one. So the first thing is, this is the fictitious company that I had chosen for a previous semester. It was Sushi Uno, which was, once again, a food truck that served sushi with a Mexican influence. So with this particular one, this was the thumbnail sketch that was done for the Sushi Uno. Now, if you open up Illustrator, you can place, or just file in place, your drawing in here if you want to trace it. If you're going to do that, I'd recommend taking that and then lowering the opacity down quite a bit and then actually locking that particular layer. So you can come over to Window, go to Layers, and you can lock that layer. Then on a layer that's above it, you could actually start to go through with your pen tool if you've got a good clean drawing, and you could start to trace this particular logo. Now in tracing, once again, I want to emphasize, I would recommend do it with no fill on so that you can see what it is you're tracing. Now you'll notice I'm not really taking a lot of time to do this perfect, because once you get the basic tracing down, you can go back in with your direct select tool and you can actually, let me reset my toolbar here because one of those is off. So let's go back to Essentials. There we go. And then you can go back in and you can modify any of those individual anchor points. So that's what you could do if you like your hand drawn. If you don't, if you decide you want to start with it by using a font, you can do that as well. But the key thing with utilizing a font is you need to make sure you do a couple things. First thing is, I want to make sure that you modify this font so it's not just typing the logo and calling it a day. I want you to actually find a version of this that you like, and then what you're going to do is you're going to create outlines. So I've right-clicked on that and I've done create outline. What that does is that gives me the ability to go in and modify any one of these individual anchor points, and I can create a customized version of that particular font and make it unique to me or my company, depending on what it is that you're going for. So with something like this, you can modify those individual anchor points after you've created an outline. What I've done with this next piece is once you get the basic structure set up, you're going to have something like this. So this is what I drew out. It's a basic outline. Did it based on this idea, but decided I didn't like the S going this way and I decided to change it up a little bit. So that's one of the many things I'm talking about with this particular project is this thumbnail that you did is just a rough draft. If you want to modify it and you come up with another idea that you think will work better, do it. I like the idea of doing a lowercase n here so I could have a piece of the actual nori on the outside portion of the sushi rolling down onto the N. That'll be the second stage that you're going to work on. So you're going to develop it so it is just outlines. After you've done that, you'll start to add color to it. And by color, I mean you could do black, white, gray, that's fine. Or you can do it in full color. So when you look at this, all I've done is I've just created another artboard and I've colorized that same version, adding in a little bit more detail to be able to make it look a little more interesting. Now, here comes the fun part. Once you actually have this created as one logo, you're going to make a ton of different variations. Let me show you what I did with mine. So here are the different variations that I came up with. Now, in order to do this, all I did was I created a much larger artboard. And I took the original logo that I had drawn out here, held down the Alt key and moved it onto the next board, and then started making variations of it, deciding to change the color, maybe moving the size of everything around, maybe adjusting where this is at. Because if you notice on here, when I originally drew this, I thought that the sushi was a little too close to the end. So on some of these, I stretched it out a little bit. Some I threw a circle on there. Some I did strokes. Some I decided to switch up the font and tweaked with creating one that almost looked like kanji. One I put a rectangle around it and did this stroked outline. Started playing around with different colors, playing around with adding in additional lines. And all of these were just created as quickly as holding down the Alt key, duplicating, going in and deciding, all right, let's go ahead and I'm going to switch here to my lasso tool. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time doing this because you can do this on your own. But with something like this, I can stretch that out. Looks like I grabbed a little too much, so I'm going to bring that one back. And it looks like I actually lost my salmon and jalapeno cilantro piece there. Okay, I'll go ahead and take that, and I can move some of these pieces around, kind of modify it a little bit. Then I can go in and decide maybe I don't want to put that there and I want to put the color underneath instead. And then maybe I might decide, hey, I want to do the same thing with this one. So I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste in front. And I'm going to take the eyedropper and suck up that red. But this time I'm going to take that and arrange and send it to the back. And now I've got a red outline on that one instead. Then I could decide if I like that. I'm just moving on to the next piece. Decide maybe I want to change the color of this so it's not quite as dark. I'll go for like a gray color. That's a little heavy, but whatever. I'm going to take that, duplicate it again, and then decide maybe I'm going to put a circle on here. So I'll put a red circle, not really worried about the color at this point. And then if I go here under the Appearances panel, the Appearances panel will let me add multiple strokes to this same exact thing. So this same exact shape. So if I come in here and I decide, all right, let me change the outline. I change it to that color. If I click on stroke, I can make it so it goes onto the outside. Click that a few times, and now I've got that circle there with a stroke. And now I'm going to add another one. I'm going to change it to a different color. So now that's putting that one onto the outside. Now I'm realizing the red is making that really, really difficult to read that. But I can come in and I can shrink it down and try to see if there's something's kind of happening there. I'm starting to lose a lot of the color and stuff that's in there, but not worried about that. Going to duplicate it again. Maybe decide, all right, I'm going to try a rectangle. And then within the rectangle, there's a way to take that corner. Now notice it kept the same colors as before. That's going to happen. But you can always adjust that later. If I click on one of these, I could change the corner a little bit and decide I don't like that color. I'm just going to make that an outline. And now I've got some other shape to potentially work with. So you can start to just kind of play around with it. Looks like a blade or something, so I could maybe do something there. So as you're going around and just quickly working with these things, you'll start to come up with other variations. And some of these variations look very, very similar to each other, but that's okay. That's why you're making so many. Once you've made a whole bunch of variations, the final thing that you're going to be turning in is this. You're going to make a letter size artboard, and you're going to choose your 10 favorite, the ones that you think have the most potential, and you'll put them and shrink them down all onto one area. Now, if by chance when you're shrinking these, if the stroke seems to be way too big, what that means is that this checkbox right over here in the Properties panel that says Scale, Strokes, and Effects, it means that that has been turned off. If you do that, watch what happens. The strokes are far, far too big when I shrink that. If I turn that on and I change the size, it will shrink the strokes proportionally. So it's a key thing. I find a lot of students run into that problem. Very, very common mistake. So be careful when you work with that. But with all that being said, you are going to have these 10 variations on your logo, and you're going to export just that single artboard. So I'm going to export artboard number 5. And you're going to export that out as a JPEG. And I would recommend go ahead and turn this resolution all the way up to 300 and make sure it's maximum and click OK. With that piece, that is what you're going to record your screencast about. So you're going to explain for number 1, I did this, number 2, I did this, 3, I did this. Even if there's only minor variations on that, it's totally fine. As long as you've got quite a few different things that are set up here. And really, when you look at it, I didn't really change a lot other than on a few of these, I used a different font for sushi. But for the most part, I used the same puzzle pieces and just experimented with color, with shapes, and with placement of is something to the left or to the right, and then added some additional colors or strokes in there. You'll record a short screencast and post it to the discussion board. And next week, other people will comment on this and give you some feedback. Back here, just to briefly summarize, the steps are going to be this. take the thumbnail that you worked with, or make a new one if you're unhappy with the final result of your thumbnail, because you can see mine changed quite a bit from this little sketch. You're going to create your outlines in Illustrator. You're going to add color. You'll make a ton of variations, but you'll only be showing me 10 of them. You're going to export that out as a JPEG, and you're going to turn that JPEG in two places. You're going to give me the JPEG in the assignment category of the Canvas module, and then you'll put the JPEG in the discussion board post, where you'll also include a recorded short screencast, 3 to 4 minutes maximum. Basically explain, what did you do to create the logo? Did you change it up a lot? And what were your thoughts as you were generating these different variations? So you'll post that screencast and the JPEG in the same post in the discussion board, and next week other people will comment on your screencast. So those are the two things you'll be turning in. The JPEG with 10 variations to me, and then you'll record and post a short screencast with that JPEG, and you'll post the JPEG and the screencast in the discussion board. So I know there's a lot of information, a lot of stuff that's there. That's why I recorded it. Also, I will include that information in the assignment category. I've also included in the module here the video. If you want to check out the Aaron Draplin logo challenge, he's an amazing designer. He's got a really personable guy. I've met him a few times at conventions, and he's the real deal. The way he acts in the video is exactly how he is in person. I've also included a link here to an article from Just Creative that talks about the top logo design trends that they anticipated for this coming year in 2019, because this was done in the end of 2018. So you can kind of see some other variations of contemporary design that are there. Then I have a link right here for the JPEG that you're going to give to me with the instructions again of what you're doing. And then a reminder here for the screencast. You're not turning anything in here. You'll be putting that into the discussion right here, while you'll post your 10 logo variations and connect your screencast to it. So you'll see I included mine here. I'm not going to record a screencast for this because I've already done enough talking with this piece, but that's what it is that you'll be turning in. As always, if you have any questions, please contact me as soon as you can. Don't wait until the very last minute, so then I can actually help you with stuff, and I can't wait to see what you create.